This is the Battle of Waterloo, the last battle of Napoleon Bonaparte and the end, the Napoleonic Wars. This was one of the most famous battles in history, with over 200,000 soldiers fighting across a small region of Belgium, taking the lives of more than 40,000 men, and it all happened in just 2 days. So let's go back to June 1815 and see how this battle went down. The year before, Napoleon had escaped exile, returned to France, and taken the throne once again. This time around, he had a lot more enemies, namely, most of Europe, who had banded together to form the Seventh Coalition against him. This coalition included Britain, Prussia, Russia, Sweden, Norway, Austria, and more, and they were all eager to put an end to Napoleon's reign. After securing his rear, Napoleon set out to deal with this coalition once and for all. His first target was the numerically superior Prussian army under Gebhard Leberecht von Blücher. But Napoleon wanted to get them in a good spot first before he struck. On June, his cavalry spotted Blücher's troops retreating from Charleroi after a failed assault on the fortress of Namur. So Napoleon ordered his men to follow them up and get ready for action. Napoleon's forces consisted of around 72,000 men spread across 9 infantry divisions, 1 cavalry division, and 1 artillery brigade. Meanwhile, Blücher had roughly 80,000 soldiers of his own, also divided into 9 infantry divisions, plus some cavalry and artillery. Now, as the French chased the Prussians, they came upon a crossroads at Ligny on the afternoon of the 16th. They were prepared to fight here, but neither side really had the advantage, and so they agreed to call a temporary truce until the following morning, while they prepared themselves further. Now, during this pause, both sides did their best to maneuver around each other and get a leg up on the other. Blücher sent one of his divisions to take up a commanding position on a hill west of the village of St. Amand. At the same time, Napoleon moved some of his infantry south to take up positions near Mount St. Jean. But when the French got there, they found that the Prussians had already claimed it. So instead, they settled for a nearby farmhouse called Hougoumont. This wasn't great news for the French, because if the Prussians could hold this high ground, then they'd have the perfect position to bombard the French and attack them from multiple angles. But as soon as the sun rose, Napoleon took action. He ordered General Durland's 4th Corps to advance to St. Amand and push the Prussians off the hill. Around the same time, he also sent General Labeau's 3rd Corps to take Hougoumont Farm. Now, while those 2 corps were marching to their positions, the French began opening fire on the Prussians from afar. Labeau's troops would also launch repeated assaults on Hougoumont, trying to kick out the defenders, but they failed. And this meant that Napoleon's left flank remained weak. At around 11 a.m., though, the Prussians opened fire from the St. Andre and took heavy casualties. Soon after, they also started losing the woods to the French, so they retreated from the battlefield altogether. In the meantime, Erlrand's men had taken heavy losses from the Prussians, and they also ended up ceding the hills to the enemy. Though, despite this, he still managed to flank the retreating Prussians. With this, Napoleon felt pretty good about himself. Maybe this battle wouldn't be such a tough one after all. He even wrote to his wife Josephine saying, "I have just had a brilliant action against the Prussians. It has lasted only half an hour. I have gained a complete victory. They are flying. All my troops are magnificent. Victory is assured. Come to Paris quickly." However, not everything was as rosy as he was painting it. While he had indeed achieved a tactical victory at Ligny, his force was now stretched thin, as he tried to keep the Prussians from retreating too far. And to make matters worse, the Allies were arriving on the scene too. You see, ever since Napoleon had made a dash for Paris in 1814, Britain and the Netherlands had occupied a number of fortresses along the River Meuse, preventing him from doing anything too drastic in the region. These fortresses included Fort Eben-Emael, which was the British center of operations in the area. Over 5,000 British troops under Sir Thomas Picton were stationed there, defending it against Napoleon's forces. For over a month, the French bombarded the fort, trying to break through, but they couldn't. They would continue to try, though, right up until the Battle of Waterloo. That's because as the French were dealing with the Prussians east of Ligny, the British were making their way over to help out. By midday on the 18th, Picton's men were ready to leave the fort and join the rest of the British force under the Duke of Wellington in the village of Braine. But when they arrived, they found that Wellington had already repelled a number of attacks from the French and had taken heavy casualties in the process. To understand what was going on here, we need to rewind a bit. When Napoleon heard that Allied forces were coming to relieve the fortress at Fort Evermont, he decided to deal with them first. He sent General Riel's Second Corps to deal with the Prussians who were retreating west. But before they reached them, they came upon a much smaller force of 8,000 men led by British General Sir Hugh Gough, who had come to assist the Prussians. That was why Wellington had taken up a defensive position here. As soon as the French came within range, Wellington ordered his men to open fire. The British took heavy casualties, but they managed to drive the French back. Napoleon, however, was enraged by this, and he would personally lead the next wave of attacks. Ordered General Durland's Fourth Corps to retake the heights of St. Amand and General Lebeau's Third Corps to take Hougoumont once again. Meanwhile, he also sent word to General Vandam's First Corps, who were at Sombref, ordering them to join the fray. The French would launch a total of 5 waves of attacks throughout the day, but they would fail. Each time Wellington's men were outnumbered 2-1, but they held their ground and inflicted heavy casualties on the French. As the sun set, Napoleon realized that his men were exhausted and that they weren't making any progress. So he called off the attacks and waited until the following day to try again. In the meantime, the Prussians had joined up with the rest of their comrades and were now a full-fledged force once again. They had around 120,000 soldiers on June. Napoleon woke up early and immediately ordered another attack on Hougoumont and the Prussians. This time, he put General Ney in charge of leading the attack, but once again the French were repelled. To make matters worse, the Prussians were driving the French off the road. Napoleon was getting desperate, so he placed himself at the head of a new assault, and for a while it looked like it might work. The French drove the Prussians and British back to their defensive lines, but this was as far as they would go. Eventually, Napoleon ordered General Piren's Sixth Corps to join the offensive, but they refused. Then he ordered General Marmont's Fifth Corps to do it, but they refused, too. Soon, almost the entire French army was engaged in the fighting. As the fighting reached its peak, the British received some reinforcements, and it turned the tide of war. The Allies would eventually drive Napoleon's men away from Hougoumont, from the Prussians and from the rest of their positions. The French would put up one final stand near the farmhouses of Bellevue and Papillard, but they were no match for the Allied forces. Within minutes, they were routed. Napoleon had lost the battle, but he didn't know it yet. He fled to a small cottage nearby, where he watched his troops retreat in agony. When he finally emerged from the cottage, he surrendered to the Allies. He was sent to St. Helena, an island in the Indian Ocean, where he spent the remaining 6 years of his life in exile. In the end, the Battle of Waterloo was one of the bloodiest conflicts in human history. The French suffered 37,000 casualties, including 15,000 captured or missing. Thank you for watching.